You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
Welcome to Industry Thought Leader Podcast. Stand out, be heard, influence. Want to influence real change with your message while become known as an authority in your field? Industry Thought Leader Podcast will show you how. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Industry Thought Leader Podcast, brought to you by Industry Thought Leader Academy. Stand out, be heard, influence. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross, also known as the Podcasting Queen. Now, my guest today says leadership is not about age, but rather leadership is about influence, impact, and inspiration. You're speaking my language, Onyi. Joining me on today's show is Onyi Anyado. Onyi is a UK-based global leadership speaker, a futurist, and a corporate trainer. Now, from his message of cutting-edge distinction, Onyi trains and coaches leaders and organizations around the world on how to leverage and lead with leadership distinction in the 2020s and beyond. Now, on today's show, he's going to share the essence of what cutting edge leadership is. He's going to talk about his 3 V's of leadership branding and 3 C's of creative leadership and how we can apply those, as well as how to live your legacy and leave your legacy. And it is AM in the morning over in the UK. So thank you, Onyi, for sharing, being up so early for you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you for the opportunity as well. And I must say the intro music was quite snazzy, if I say so myself.
Isn't it? It's interesting. When I first started, I had another podcast called Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, and I love all my podcasts to have kind of that music. And of course, back then we didn't have the video, and so many guests said, "Oh, I'm sitting there bopping away," but now we can't do that. But start off the show how you're going to continue on. And I think today's topic, talking about cutting edge leadership. I mean, how many leaders are sitting around now virtual boardrooms with challenges and decisions that they've had to make and I'm sure they've heard this word many more times than they would care to is unprecedented times.
Yes.
And looking forward to hearing what you have to share. So cutting edge leadership, what does that mean to you? Love to hear your definition and what that means to you.
Yeah, so in 2013/14, I said the following: leadership is bringing people into new realms of excellence and challenging them to become distinguished in their chosen field.
Yes.
Then in 2015/16, I said leadership isn't about age, but rather leadership is about influence, impact, and inspiration. And then in 2018/19, I said distinction in leadership isn't a mindset. Distinction in leadership is a state of mind. So the essence of cutting edge leadership is to become, or is to be, legacy minded.
Yes. Let's just talk about that. As you shared that, I thought, wow, I love the way that it said it's not about mindset, but a state of mind. So when you say that, it kind of it's who you are. It's a being. A state of mind is really you through and through. So what was it that had you come up with that distinction? Was it things that perhaps you'd experienced or things that you'd seen, or did you know that moving forward it had to become this for us to really start to when you talk about cutting edge leadership? How did you come up with that distinction?
Yeah, so I was, born and raised in the UK, in London, the UK, coming from a Nigerian background, and so at that time, a lot of Nigerians, but even now, the background is, you become a doctor, a lawyer, or a pharmacist. Go to a top university and get a good job and settle down in marriage and then work for 25 years, and that's a mindset, that's a particular way of life, and then unfortunately, that's not for every single person, definitely not for me. There's nothing wrong with it, but then I realized I had to have a state of mind, and particularly now we're in the era of creative distinction, a new decade, the 2020s. We can't now, particularly in a new norm, have a a mindset, but rather a state of mind that's constantly seeing new opportunities and possibilities. Because even if though we see obstacles and problems, in the obstacles and problems, that's where we actually can see opportunities and possibilities. And that's the distinction between a set mind and a state of mind.
Yes, so true. And you know, what we find ourselves in now, it's constantly changing. In fact, one of my clients, I saw a comment that she shared, and I thought, boy, I wonder how many people have experienced that or are experiencing it. She said, "I'm repivoting my pivot." And
Wow.
change comes upon us, and then we need to change again. And moving forward, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it said, and you might even say, speed or at the speed of change now, it's getting quicker and quicker. And the
Yes.
ability to be able to be flexible and take a step back and be okay with not knowing everything and being okay with change, I think that's something that we all need to get more comfortable with. Would you say that's true?
100%. Definitely. I mean, in the last 7 months, this first 7 months of a new decade, it's like it's 30 years. The level of change has been, as you mentioned, unprecedented. But at the same time, it gives us platforms to be, the new skills are, hindsight, foresight, and even farsight. And it's not knowing everything, but you're knowing something.
Yeah, brilliant. And you know, the people that I think that are going to be able to shift well through that, something you just said, and I totally believe in this, is that often we can look at, well, how did people adapt and change previously? What have we learned from that? And what can we apply moving forward? When you approach a situation, because I love that, you know, you say that you also are a futurist, and so sometimes the things that we can kind of foresee can be determined by what's happened previously. What are some of the things that you are seeing kind of moving forward that is very much part of the message when you're talking about leadership and what that may look like now moving forward in a world where a lot of interaction is no longer face to face with our team, but rather a hybrid or a balance of both in person and online?
Yeah, I think even though, they've a good question, by the way, even though they've got, the term social distancing, I think now the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So hence, I see more people finding out really who they are. They're more than just in the UK, national insurance number or a tax bracket or a title. They're actually human being. Hence, is living your legacy and leaving your legacy. So I think there's going to be more of an awareness now, more awareness that, hey, I'm more than just a title. I'm more than just a wage bracket. I'm more than just the national insurance number. I'm actually there's that film, I'm not a number, I'm a free man, or something on them lines. So it's
Yeah.
more that human centered. There's a big push about artificial intelligence, AI, which is good, but I think there's also now going to be a big push and an understanding that also the human centered intelligence. That hey,
Yeah.
I'm actually living in empathy, walking in empathy, and I'm living and leaving my legacy. So yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I love that you've mentioned that about AI. And, you know, one of the things that I will often do is see what people are doing. We've heard the term when everyone zigs, zags. And so what I look at that, you know, when you're thinking about AI, yes, look, there's often aspects of where we can really leverage AI. But I think now we're in a season where, because of the fact that many of us are now we're here in Melbourne, so we're in a forced second lockdown, because people have been isolating, and for some people not having that interaction, that is when, and even moving forward, whatever we decide in business, and as we're bringing out our thought leadership, and as companies, and even from solopreneur up to company, we have to consider, is this enhancing the relationship that we're building? Are we contributing to improving it, making it easier, more user friendly, or are we putting another barrier in between to relationships and trust, know, and like being built? That's something that we need to consider when we're looking at adapting and adopting AI too, yes?
100%. That is actually amazing thought leadership, what you just passed on. Yes, a million percent. I think it's. I love what you mentioned earlier. It's not knowing everything, but realizing that, okay, whatever we do know, let's work together. Let's make it more, customer centered. Let's make it more people focused in that sense, solution based.
Yeah, brilliant. I can't wait to hear more about your 3 V's of leadership branding and 3 C's of creative leadership. Let's dive into the 3 V's of leadership branding. What are they?
Okay, good. So first, let us establish what branding is. So in 2015, I said the following. I'll say it twice so we can really break it down. So I said that branding is not just a product; it's also a way of life, an idea. Branding is actually leadership. So branding is not just a product; it's also a way of life, an idea. Branding is actually leadership. So we've now established that it's not the app, it's not the iPhone, it's not the Rolex, it's not the car. Branding is not just a product, it's also a way of life, an idea. What's an idea? It's well, in this case, the organizations, I created the 3V, the vision, the values, and the voice. So the vision, the values, and the voice of an organization or even an individual, an entrepreneur. So
Yes.
that's what ultimately, because why do human beings line up for the latest iPhone 12 or 13, whatever's out for 7 days in the rain, the snow,
Yeah.
not necessarily the phone, it's not necessarily the product, but it's the vision, the values, and the voice of Steve Jobs. But Steve Jobs been dead for nearly 10 years, so he's living his legacy and he's leaving his legacy. So the 3 V's of leadership branding, which can be broken down into organizational branding as well, is the vision, the values, and the voice.
Yeah. Something that a conversation that I had recently on this show. And so if you're looking across any of the platforms, just search and Tiago Nunes. And, he was talking about something similar about organizations and then individuals. And it was an interesting topic that he was talking about was, so often what we do as organizations, we determine the values and then we try and hire people who have similar values. However, if we encourage people to also identify what's their purpose and values and how can you contribute and then all work together towards the common goal or whatever that vision is, obviously for the business. Do you think that even though we know that it's important to establish and get clear and communicate and live out our values, our vision and our voice, how are we faring? Are we starting to get it right, or is there a bit of a work to go, so to speak, when it comes to determining that?
I think there's, we're improving, but there's a lot of work to go. I mean, working with organizations, it's quite interesting when you ask the staff, employees, the workforce, what's the vision, the values, and the voice of the organization. 9 times out of 10, many don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes even when I work with senior management doesn't know. So it's interesting if senior management doesn't know and the workforce doesn't know. That says a lot that actually nobody knows the vision, the values, and the voice. So rather than there being one vision, there's the vision, and the vision is not actually going anywhere. So it's just a mesh of just noise and So it's quite interesting. So hence we do what we do.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because when you speak to people who really are connected, and an example that Tiago mentioned, and I love to tie these incredible thought leaders such as yourself and Tiago together because we're all from different sides of the planet. But as you said, it's a small world. And every interaction and decision that we make as an organization is going to impact someone somewhere or lots of someone somewhere. If you don't believe me, just look at the situation that we are in now because of someone's decision and action. And so what the example that he gave, and I think this speaks beautifully to what you're saying here, Onyi, is that someone was asked, what do you do? And he's a cleaner for NASA. And he said, well, my role supports people in going to the moon. Now, for him to be able to establish that, he could have said, well, I clean. But he said, I contribute to the team that helps put someone else on the moon. Now, that's a vision that's been voiced and really been embedded in the psyche of individuals, but as a corporation. That's the kind of thing that you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, what you just said is like, wow, like, that's amazing. That's the vision, the values, and the voice. Amazing. Yeah.
And I think what you're also talking about here too, from an organization's point of view, if the leader or leaders in your organization aren't able to clarify it because they're not clear, how on earth are our team members going to do that? But something else, and I'd love you to speak into this too, something else that I think can often derode morale in an organization and team members as well, is that if we have determined what it is and clarified that, but the leaders aren't living it out, Because if the leaders aren't living it out, individuals go, well, they're not doing that. Why should we? That can really erode morale too, can't it?
100%. So I think even now, we're in a new norm, a new decade, the era of creative distinction, a time of knowledge sharing. I think many leaders and organizations have to go back to the drawing board and realize, hey, let's all start together, and let's actually give more responsibility and more of an ear to the workforce, because they've got something to say, and sometimes they can see what we can't see. They can perceive and understand what we can't perceive and understand. So I think now is for everyone collectively to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, we're in this together. Let's move forward, because COVID-19 doesn't discriminate against anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point that you mentioned there. Even for organizations that had prior to this clarified what their vision, what their voice and values were, let's go back to the table and let's revisit that moving forward. And I think contributing or encouraging the contribution and the voice of your team, of collectively, individually and collectively, is so important, because in instances like this, we need to feel that we have a voice and a contribution, and what a way to be able to unite them, even despite the challenging situations that we're in. And I think even more so we need to do that, don't we? Because we don't have the environments anymore where people can have a chat around the water cooler. Let's try and not only recreate, but create, and we're going to dive into what creative leadership is in a moment, create things that and I don't even know the word for it, but something that will allow your team to still feel part of that team and be working together. I think that's really important. 3 C's, creative leadership. What are they?
So I'd like to put dates specifically. So I think it was actually 2017. So when I began speaking about all things leadership, cutting edge leadership, I started with creativity, but actually it was an evolution. So I began talking about creative leadership. So the 3 C's are critical thinking, collaborative thinking, and creative thinking.
Nice. How are we faring on each of those? I'm going to write them down because we're going to unpack them. Can you say them one more time for me?
Critical thinking, collaborative thinking, and creative thinking. Critical, collaborative, and creative.
Critical thinking. How are we faring in that? Is that a skill? Is that a strength that some people are born with and do really well? Can we develop critical thinking skills? What would you say?
Oh yes, 100%. I think. I mean, unfortunately, they don't teach this to us in schools.
No, they don't.
Sometimes life teaches us to be critical thinkers, or the work environment, and maybe university to a certain extent. But 100%, that's one of the skills that's ultimately going to, the future of work is the fact that the ones that are going to take the lead are the ones that are critical thinking, seeing a problem and straight away, or not so much straight away, but have the ability to come up with a solution quicker and easier than anyone else. Because as you mentioned at the start, everything is now fast. Everything's moving at a high speed. So if everything else is going at a high speed, you can't necessarily be afforded to be left behind. Hence the critical thinking.
Yeah. Critical thinking. I love the way that you've distinguished that, because you've got critics, the people who complain and don't come up with a solution, but we're actually saying you need to then also give a solution. I love an example that I heard once, a story that was shared, that a leader would often say to his team, look, I know that there's going to be challenges and there's going to be issues and problems that we are faced with, and I'm welcome you to come and talk to me about them. But before you do, I would like you to come up with 3 different ways that you think would be a good suggestion to overcome the challenge, and then bring them to me. Tell you what, a lot of times the team did not even have to approach him because they'd sorted it out on their own. But what a great way to empower his team. And we can do that with our children. We can do that with our team members, to say, think of 3 ways. And one thing I think as leaders that we need to do, and we can often cut off or stop the ability to create and to think this way, is by saying that's not going to work. That's not going to work. I learned that as well, isn't it? Get these ideas flowing, because you do not know that one suggestion, which may be a little bit left field, could prompt someone else to think, well, hang on a minute, I love where you're going with this. Let's take this further. And before long, collaboratively, because you said that, together we have come up with a solution that no one could have come up with on their own. When you see people doing critical thinking, Are there different ways, like, sometimes creatively, because you talk about this too, sometimes we have different styles of creative or critical thinking? Are there different, nuances when it comes to that? I'd love your thoughts on that. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
yeah. So yeah, I think one particular style is, I call it observation. So I always say, creative leadership, creativity comes from your observation, your desperation, or your acceleration. So there's different styles of observing something. It's like, wow, I saw that. That's a problem. I can solve it like this. So it comes from observation. It comes from desperation. Like this situation has been happening in my business for too long, or in the department for so long. We now need to take that discipline, have that discipline to say, hey, we need to come and up with a solution. Or it
Yeah.
comes from acceleration. Things are going so fast, and bam, one idea and a solution come out literally out of nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes on TV shows, and I love observing, kind of sitting in the back and watching, because you never know. Someone who said something, 2 weeks ago could suddenly be, into the center of your mind and think, hang on a second, this ties to this, and we can see patterns. But those movies, you kind of see someone says something just quite casually, and all of a sudden someone goes like that because something has happened. And that's the
Yeah,
kind of thing that I think you're talking about when we observe, and we do so with a curious mindset, and
yeah,
one that's always looking for different opportunities. I think it expands our awareness and our ability to, without judgment, go. Have you ever heard of the technique called the Disney technique? It's something that was shared to me, and this is where you have the creatives. We go into the creative zone and we just think of lots of different ideas. The more crazy ideas is fantastic, but when everyone is around the table in the creative zone, you're not allowed to go into what they call the next zone is someone who kind of looks, I can't even think of the term, but looks at it with more kind of not criticism, but okay, let's have a look at that. What sort of things do we need in that area? Can we
yes,
expand on that? And then we go critical thinking, the ones, that's not going to work for that. And then we go back to the realist. That's right. The realist sits in the middle. And that process can really help with critical thinking, where it comes up
yeah,
with different ideas. And we need to, I think, create a culture where you've got every department critically thinking their way through and encouraging them. So as leaders, don't come in and, no, that's not going to work. Let them share. And
yeah,
then let's look at different ideas, because one idea that's shared today may not be the process that's going to help this problem, but it's going to help something that your team is going to be stuck with 6 months down the track. And I love that. Collaborative creative leadership. How are we doing with the collaboration?
yeah. So I think you actually mentioned it as well, with the critical thinking. So it's really coming together, like-minded people, and not just in organizations. So when I'm speaking to leaders and entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs or team members in businesses, I always talk about, once a week, watch a TEDx or watch a video about design thinking, or, agile or disruption. So you're rubbing minds with like-minded people. You may never see them or meet them in the flesh, but you're now rubbing your minds with them. So you're collaborative thinking in regards design thinking, in regards the future of work. So you're rubbing your minds with like-minded people, and you're actually coming up with more solutions and this, thinking outside of the box. I mean, I was just funny enough, just before earlier on, I was watching a film called Lucy, and it was about a lady who, cut a long story short, she was involved in a Malaysian drugs, whatever, and then she swallowed some drugs, but it made her brain peak at 100% level. So she had the greatest memory. She was the greatest thinker. She was really thinking outside of the box, really, 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 really quick thinking. And that made me think about collaborative thinking, that we can learn from everyone and anything to get to the next level.
Yeah, so true, because and I'm not a neuroscience or anything like this, but people, though, they say that we're at any one time really only using a small percentage of our brain. In fact, the 10% comes to mind. Now, if that's the case, and we're not like Lucy, able to take swallow something that fires up all cylinders, that's when, imagine if you get number of people around who are all using that. I would think, though, once you start to have ideas and someone shares that and that idea rolls into the other, your brain starts firing on all. I know mine does anyway, sometimes what I do is I'm not even going to think of that issue because my brain just wants to go into problem solving. What are different ways? I haven't got the brain's power to even think about that new problem. But I think what's important and what you've said in terms of collaboration, sometimes the way that we're going to come up with a new solution requires contribution of other people with different experiences.
Yeah.
And even the weirdest of things that you may not think. I mean, when you talked about, some different industries, I mean, here in Australia, this would have been a couple of years ago, they were talking about having chips, so IT, being sewn into clothing. Who would have thought? And by doing that, allowed, if someone was wearing a shirt, to monitor the heart rate and things like that. So you just don't know, through collaborating, even if the most foreignest, individuals and departments and industries can come up with a solution that changes the world because they can come up with a creative idea that no one else has thought of. Let's talk about creativity. What does creativity mean to you?
Yes. So, I mean, my backstory is quite interesting. So I dropped out of university. So I've got no formal qualification, so to say. I mean, I dropped out of university the second year to live a particular lifestyle, but then a few years later, I went back to adult college. I think got level 1 or level 2 in counselling. So I always wanted to become a counsellor. But about 3 years ago, I said that creativity is the new qualification.
Yeah.
Creativity is actually the new qualification. And it's important. I mean, if someone wants to become a doctor, obviously they have to go to medical school. If someone wants to become an archaeologist or a brain surgeon, etc., they have to get some formal kind of qualifications. But actually, in the era of creative distinction, now we're in the new norm and it's all making sense. Creativity is a new qualification. And so I said, dear leader, don't settle at the back with other people's innovation, but rather lead with your distinction.
Yeah.
Don't settle at the back with other people's innovation, with Steve Jobs' innovation, with Elon Musk's innovation, with my innovation, with Ameri's innovation, but rather lead with your distinction. Your distinction is your vision, your values, and your voice. That calls you a critical, collaborative, and creative thinker.
Yeah.
So creativity is a new qualification.
Brilliant. How often do we look at other people, or as you said, it's expectations, a mindset? You mentioned, people often coming from Nigeria, your background, they think you've got your whole life mapped out, become a doctor, become a lawyer. I mean, I come from the career industry. That was my training, my background. And how many people, when I'd say, well, what led you to this particular field? Well, my grandfather and my grandfather's grandfather and so on. And so I think what you're saying there is, and it's such a great reminder that there may be things that we do quite innately that, and I believe that, each and every one of us has an assignment to contribute to this world, to the betterment of others in our decisions, in our interactions. And so when we look at it that way and we stop comparing ourselves from what everyone else is doing and stay in what you were saying, what we're doing, our distinction, and get clear on that and live that out with purpose, with intention. How can I collaborate with others and bring my gifts and strengths and talents and collaborate with others so that we can come up with something? I think once we start to do that, that is when we can live our individual legacy, empower others to do the same, and we leave the world a much better place, I think, than we found it in. And that's, I think, what would be a good, certainly good for everyone to be in. Do you think, I know a lot of people that I interact with, and even sometimes myself, we sometimes doubt. What do you do to remind yourself that where you're at and what you're doing is great, and because we so often devalue our own value and our own distinction, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And particularly now, what's going on in the world is like, oh my gosh, I need to do this, I need to do that. Oh my gosh, what's happening? I mean, for example, yesterday, I had a day of just laughing, just watching funny films, and obviously sending my emails, having meetings, online meetings. But I spent a lot of day, thankful, like, wow, like, I've come so far. I've still got a long way to go, and I'm enjoying where I am. So yeah, I'm a futurist. I'm thinking about the future and helping people with the future, but at the same time, I'm enjoying where I am and having a laugh and enjoying it. And I think sometimes, particularly now, what's going on, we're in a rush. We need to do this. We need to do that. We've got targets, objectives, goals. I need to get a new job. I need to make more money, etc., etc. But at the same time, we need to enjoy where we are and be grateful for where we are.
Yeah. Great reminder, I think, too, if we are leaders of larger teams, when something like this happens, and I know we're many months into it, however, how have we handled how we handle it with our team? Do we realize that people's lives individually, personally with their family is definitely going to impact how they show up to work and, and how we lead? I mean, this morning I read an article by one of my colleagues and thought leader, Sally Anderson, who was talking about how sometimes, as leaders, if we're so critical, if we're micromanaging, and if we're doing exactly the opposite of what you've been talking about today and create an environment which creates even more stress and anxiety for our team, and that micromanagement, that is not going to set an example, nor is it going to create an environment where they can bring cutting edge leadership, where they can share their voice and live out their values. And I think moving forward, we need to be mindful of that, because we need to have a team that what's the word I'm looking for, that moves quickly, that's able to embrace change, shift with it quickly. There's a word for it. I don't know if you know what, can read minds, but anyway, if I think of it.
Agile.
Yeah, but fluid. We need a fluid team, don't we, to be able to move quickly in that way and encourage that. And you know what I think sometimes, and this is beautiful in what you said, that you would just be, it's sometimes in that downtime and just getting out and doing that the mind is always still working in the back, isn't it? Filing things and just making sense of things. So being on all the time, constantly push is not doing anyone any favors. Give yourself and your team the space and grace to be able to have some of that downtime, whatever that looks like, because they will come back if you've created the right environment and the right support on all cylinders to be able to, as you say, be critical thinkers, be collaborative and creative. And that, I think, is going to create a culture where together they can live out their brand online and with your customers and stakeholders too. Love today's conversation. You've got my mind all fired up as well. Connect with you. How can they find out more about the great work you're doing?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm sure the links, you're going to have the links on the thing. But yeah, you can just find me on Onyi Anyado on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my favorite social media platform. I'm always there. So always learning, always sharing. So yeah, Onyi Anyado, we can connect me on LinkedIn. Again, if you search my name, Instagram, Twitter. But yeah, LinkedIn, send me a message and let's learn and share. Let's let's increase our collaborative, creative and critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how we connected. And you sent through some videos. You've got some incredible videos over on YouTube too, I think, if I can remember correctly. So wonderful conversation. We have just scratched the surface in what we've shared today. So certainly connect Onyi and let's continue the conversation with him and see what you can come up with and collaborate together. Thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much.